This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. It's been half a century since the Great Society, and historian Gary Donaldson takes a look at how Lyndon Johnson, working with President Eisenhower, accumulated the political clout to change America. Professor Karen Piper foresees a world that will be fighting wars about water, which, of course, is abundant, but severely maldistributed. And Bill Press talks with Maryland Congressman Elijah Cummings about the Secret Service mess. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. 50 years after the high point of Lyndon Johnson's power, historian Gary Donaldson talks about how he had previously reached an accommodation with President Eisenhower to keep the country on a middle road of prosperity. And we say hello to Gary Donaldson, the Keller Family Foundation Chair in American History and Director of the Center for Undergraduate Research at Xavier University of Louisiana, a specialist in 20th century American history. His latest book is The Secret Coalition, Ike, LBJ, and the Search for a Middle Way in the 1950s. Gary Donaldson, thanks for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Glad to be here.
Now, your book it's a political science one, but it could be classified as science fiction because it's about the two parties working together in the national interest over an 8-year period. Unheard of, at least nowadays, it seems. But you call that an era of good feeling. What was the background that led Republicans and Democrats to tolerate each other?
Well, basically, I think what we're looking at here is Eisenhower was a moderate Republican. Johnson was a moderate Democrat. Some want to say he was Southern. He didn't like that. He wanted to be a Westerner. It doesn't really matter. But he was a moderate Democrat, and the two, it might seem that a moderate Republican and a moderate Democrat might meet in the center, and that really is kind of what happened. Now, these two men never really. You know, the cover of the book shows them whispering in each other's ears. And I suspect that I'm sure that happened, but mostly they didn't. They pretty much stayed apart from each other. But the idea was that if Johnson kept his legislation in the middle, Eisenhower kept his legislation and ideas in the middle. The result was almost always that these two men were able to push through legislation. Now, they never really, as far as I could ever find, slapped each other on the back and sat down in the evening and had a drink like Tip O'Neill and Reagan used to do. Nothing like that, really. But the idea was that they really both thought pretty much the same way. Now, there's also another factor here, I think it's extremely important, is that Eisenhower was an extremely popular president. I mean, my God, he had beaten the Germans and whatever, and the American people thought that he was just a wonderful man, and every time he stood for election, big smile, all of this, Americans voted for him. He was an extremely powerful man. Johnson always knew that he could never ever push against Eisenhower. If Eisenhower was going to be an enemy, it was going to be tough for everybody. So Johnson did everything that he could to work with Eisenhower, work down the center of the road, and make things work. Now, we have nothing like that in our modern Congress. Our president's seated right now, and so there is just huge conflict, but the situation in the 50s, I think, was extremely different. And if you want to call it an era of good feeling, I put that in there. I think it was that. I think so.
Mm-hmm. But now, and as you write, Eisenhower and Johnson did not have a similar view of the world, did not work together that much. But what are some of the things that got accomplished over the objections of the more partisan wings of the two parties?
Well, probably the best example is in general is just foreign policy. I mean, Eisenhower was so strong on foreign policy. The American people followed him on foreign policy, and Johnson and the Democrats pretty much had to go along with that, no matter what it was Eisenhower wanted to do in foreign policy. The Democrats probably, in almost all cases, supported it. Well, Eisenhower then was willing then okay, if you'll support me in this, Sputnik, other foreign policy issues, I will support you and let the Democratic, let's call social issues, social bills. He would put those through. He would be willing to go along with that. He wouldn't veto them. He vetoed a lot of stuff, but he didn't. He pretty much let that kind of thing go. So it was kind of a give and take. You support me here, I'll support you there, and as long as you don't go too far, and as long as you don't go too far, we'll all kind of meet in the middle and get it all done. Now, if you're looking for a specific thing, probably the best example is the Civil Rights Act of 1957. Johnson, well, it was an Eisenhower idea. It was an Eisenhower plan. Eisenhower wanted it to go through. Johnson grabbed it, pushed it through himself, but he pushed it through as a very, very, very moderate act. Now, there were a lot of people on the far left who really thought that Johnson had eviscerated the bill, but Johnson kept saying, okay, we'll get half a loaf now, we'll get this now, we'll get the full loaf down the road. And Eisenhower was willing to sign it. It didn't have anything in it. Of course, Eisenhower's going to have to sign these bills for them to become law, and Eisenhower was willing to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1957. So, everybody's so critical of Johnson for doing that, for killing that bill or really weakening it. But Johnson knew what he was doing. He had to get that bill past Eisenhower, and Eisenhower had to sign it, and so he couldn't put anything in there that Eisenhower didn't want because Eisenhower would veto it. So that's how the Civil Rights Act of 1957 was finally passed.
We're speaking with Gary Donaldson from Xavier University of Louisiana. He's a specialist in 20th century American history, and talking a little bit about his latest book, The Secret Coalition, Ike, LBJ, and the Search for a Middle Way in the 1950s, here on americasdemocrats.org. So obviously, those guys didn't see eye to eye. It was a you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back kind of thing, and we've sort of lost that way today, anyway. But Eisenhower faced some resistance from the right wing in his own administrations. How did he overcome that?
Well, he overcame it really by his own popularity. He put people in positions, saw to it that people got elected. Political scientists would say that he had very, very long coattails. And if you supported Eisenhower, you got elected, you got into your seat. Eisenhower saw to it that happened, and anybody who didn't want to be a part of that, he just kept them out. He pushed them back. Barry Goldwater was a very good example in 1958, and other conservatives like him. Eisenhower just pushed them away. He kept them away. They would not be. He would not allow them to be a part of his coalition of very, very large, very powerful Republican moderates in government. And I'm not talking about just Washington. I'm talking about governors and all over the country. He was just a very, very powerful man.
And then on the other side of that, LBJ, how did he weaken the hold of conservative Southern Democrats who opposed civil rights and other progressive legislation?
Well, Johnson had the power to take people out of leadership positions. Now, I know that seems kind of odd today, but Johnson would see to it that a certain, and I should have some names for you, but I actually don't, but it has some, take them out of leadership committee positions, put them in other committees. A very good example, I think probably Hubert Humphrey was a liberal. He was, I believe, on the labor committee or something. Johnson took him off that committee and put him in transportation, someplace where he could still speak, he could still be important, but he wasn't a firebrand. He kind of quieted people like that down and kept them out of the loop and just. He did this with conservative Democrats as well, and of course civil rights. We're talking here in the 50s, and with the exception of the Deep South, the civil rights had pretty much, it was such a volatile issue. Johnson kind of kept away from it because he knew it divided the Democrats, and it was becoming it was less defensible, let's just say, than it was before. I like to make the point that America was being television was pushing civil rights at the American people, and I think the American people began to realize that race relations in the South were not really compatible, that it was really based on hate and violence, and Americans began to dislike it a great deal, and put pressure on their congressmen and so forth, and so I think civil rights was very slowly beginning to be pushed aside as a primary issue. And like I said, Johnson didn't like it. Johnson tried to stay away from civil rights as much as he could because he knew that it sent the South off in a different direction, and he didn't like that. He needed uniformity within the party.
Mm-hmm. Now, you note that it was harder for LBJ to hold a big majority together, but easier to control a one-vote majority. Are there lessons for today's Senate or the Senate that is seated next January?
I think there is. It seems to me that a Senate that only has one seat majority, or Democrats have a one seat majority, Johnson was able to appeal to the senators' party unity. You have to vote this way. If you don't, that means you have to vote the other way, and we'll lose. So we can't lose this issue, this point, this bill. So you have to vote. And when we got toward 1958, particularly, the Senate Democrats had a huge majority in the Senate. Johnson couldn't control them. Here were these senators who wanted to vote one way so that they could appeal to a constituency back home, or maybe appeal to a lobbying group someplace, and knowing full well that if they voted against the Democrats would probably still go ahead and win. But Johnson's power began to diminish in and about 1958. So as far as today's concerned, I mean, if we're talking about a Senate in January that has one seat Democratic advantage, maybe two seats or whatever, it just seems to me that the Democratic Party leader, whoever that will be, is going to be able to appeal to party unity and keep the party together on certain issues, as Johnson did in the 1950s. It's much more difficult, and I think it is so true, to control a huge majority. It's very hard. And as the majority was small before 1958, that's where Johnson really had his power, and that's where we really see Lyndon Johnson today as a real powerful man. That's why, I think.
You don't get the feeling that there's anybody with that type of power in either chamber nowadays. I mean, do you get that sense too?
Yeah, I get that sense. I don't know. We hear names, we talk about, but there's nobody who had that cajoling thing that Johnson would just if you don't do this, I'm going to break your arm. And Johnson was that way. He really was. And we don't really have that kind of pressure, I don't think, put on anybody today by any particular face in the United States Senate, certainly.
Well, perhaps somebody can learn by history.
Yes,
perhaps. Gary Donaldson, Keller Family Foundation Chair in American History and Director of the Center for Undergraduate Research at Xavier University of Louisiana, joining us today to talk about his latest book, The Secret Coalition, Ike, LBJ, and the Search for a Middle Way in the 1950s. Gary, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you.
All right, and this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Is water a commodity or is it a human right? Professor Karen Piper says corporations have a distinct answer to that question, one that should be obvious. We'll talk to her about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Some people have a recurring nightmare of rising to give a speech, but realizing they know nothing about the topic, then realizing they're naked. It turns out that corporations also have such nightmares. Okay, corporations aren't people, no matter what the Supreme Court fabulists claim, so they can't dream. But their top executives can, and several recently suffered the same chilling dream, only it was real. These are chieftains of brand-name corporate giants who have secretly funneled millions of their shareholders' dollars into the dark money vault of the Republican Governors Association. In turn, the RGA channels the political cash into the campaigns of assorted right-wing governors. This underground pipeline has been a dream come true for corporations, for it lets them elect anti-consumer, anti-worker, anti-environment governors without having to let their customers know they're doing it. But oops! In September, the RGA made a coding error in its database of dark money donors, exposing the names of a mess of GOP's secret money corporations. Suddenly, the chieftains were buck naked in front of customers, employees, stockholders, and others who were startled and angered to learn that the companies they supported were working against their interests. Here are some of the corporate dreamers that were pulling the wool over our eyes: Aetna, Aflac, Blue Cross, Coca-Cola, Comcast, ExxonMobil, Hewlett-Packard, Koch Industries, Microsoft, Novartis, Pfizer, Shell Oil, United Health, Verizon, Walgreens, and Walmart. This is Jim Hightower saying Fred Wertheimer, a lifelong champion of political money reform, noted that the RGA's boo-boo offers a classic example of how corporations are trying to use secret money hidden from the American people to buy influence, and of how the Governors Association is selling it.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you: the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. With the American Southwest facing water shortages, Professor Karen Piper offers us a more global outlook on water distribution, which she says is largely a matter of corporate control. And we say hello to University of Missouri Professor Karen Piper, whose research focuses on globalization, colonial and neo-colonial discourse, and the rhetoric of development. Her latest book is The Price of Thirst: Global Water Inequality and the Coming Chaos. Karen Piper, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Indeed. Your book's a little on the scary side for some folks, and when they take the time to read it, recognizing a problem that I don't think a lot of people realize we have. What is the nature of the water problem in the world today?
Basically, there are 3 issues. One is pollution, one is climate change, and one is groundwater over-extraction. And these 3 things have made clean water inaccessible for 20% of the world's population. And I argue that this contributes to social unrest in my book. And the important thing to remember about climate change is that it moves water around the world. So water does not disappear from the planet because we have a water cycle that keeps it circulating in the same amount. But imagine that rivers feeding Los Angeles are suddenly not running anymore. That would be an example. Instead, there's water in Canada. So what are you going to do? You can't just pick up Los Angeles and move it to Canada. So the problem for us is that our infrastructure is not very transportable.
Mm-hmm. Is water, properly understood, an economic commodity or a human right?
That's a huge question because there has been a decades-long battle fought over that question between water justice activists and corporations. Personally, I'm against commodifying water. I would say that water is itself, it resists interpretation. We should respect its own laws and pay attention to how it acts. And treating it as a commodity is the opposite of that. Corporations want to say water is just like socks or soap or any item on a shelf, and it's not. It's interconnected with everything else.
Mm-hmm. Is the water issue more of a developing world problem, or does it affect America just as much as anywhere else?
No, it affects everybody. And one of the worst hotspots in the world actually right now is the Southwest in the United States. That and Sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. And so we're more alike than we think with these parts of the world. If we think of it as just a developing world problem, we'll be in for a rude awakening, frankly.
Mm-hmm. What governmental or legislative solutions would you advocate?
Then a lot. First, there need to be changes. In my book, I talk about the changes that need to happen at the level of global governance, which would be the IMF and the World Bank and the WTO, which need to stop putting conditions on loans that force countries to privatize their water supplies, or, the WTO and NAFTA are forcing countries to sell their water, which is causing all kinds of problems. So at the national level in the United States, we need to re-regulate water, because basically in the 1990s, these regulations were thrown out, prohibiting water marketing and prohibiting long-term corporate takeovers of our water supply. So now we can have a 30-year lease. A corporation can take over a city's water supply for 30 years, and then you essentially lose control of it. So that was all done, under the name, it was done under Clinton, but in the name of neoliberalism at the time. And then another thing is that we need to push Congress to establish a clean water trust fund in this country, because we have stopped investing in our public water supply since the days of Ronald Reagan. And we have very old infrastructure that needs to be fixed, and we'll start having problems with our drinking water if we don't do that.
That's something that gets me, is the infrastructure problems, because they keep talking about we need to have jobs. Start fixing that. Start start with some of that stuff.
And above all, the biggest legislative changes we have to have a global agreement about climate change, but we also in the United States need to focus on becoming a more carbon neutral country, which is like countries like Costa Rica have set a goal of becoming completely carbon neutral by 2020, I think. And we need to do something like that.
We're speaking with University of Missouri professor Karen Piper, talking about her latest book, The Price of Thirst, Global Water Inequality and the Coming Chaos. You make a remarkable claim that private water companies and non-governmental organizations purposely use water to control population. How does that work, and what can be done about it?
I think you're talking about a couple of quotes in my book that are very disturbing, one from the corporate world and one from the World Bank, and both of them say it would be a mistake to provide clean water in Africa because it would cause overpopulation. And the World Bank quote is from the 1960s, but the other one is very recent. And if you apply that logic in reverse, they're really talking about killing people by not supplying them with water. So these are very troubling quotes, but they also show how these institutions tend to think about people in numbers, and that there's, can be racism behind it. So discussing water as a commodity only contributes to this kind of quantification. And there's also several other examples in the book about corporations or governments cutting off water supplies to people or trying to control the population in the sense of controlling unrest. And they would either cut off their water or threaten to cut off their water, for instance, in South Africa to end anti-apartheid protests.
That's just absolutely stunning to me, that kind of thing goes on in advanced countries.
More than you think.
Yeah, well, and this is a quite the lesson that we're receiving today, because Yeah, there's a water problem, but it doesn't hit home that closely. Probably because, as you had mentioned earlier, we take it for granted, and I would guess it maybe even more so in this country than in others. So here we are in the U.S. Water safe to drink from the tap. It seems to be a bit of a scandal that everyone's drinking commercially bottled water.
Oh, definitely. Yes, and I think you hit the nail on the head. We take it for granted here because we don't remember the long struggle that there was to get a good, clean public water supply in this country. We used to have private water at the turn of the 20th century, and the supply was so bad that people had to, protest to get a good public water supply. And now our water supply is fabulous. It's one of the best in the world, but it got there through a lot of hard work. And it's one of the things that makes America a rich country in contrast to other countries. So now when people are, switching to bottled water, it's kind of tragic. I think one of the immediate things you can do about the global water crisis is start drinking tap water. If you do that, not only are you boycotting the bottled water industry, but you're also emotionally reinvesting in your public water supply. You're like taking ownership of it. You want it to be good. You want to take care of it. And so, and another thing is that we have to remember that our aversions to tap water are a new thing. So, like I said, people used to be thrilled to have running water in the house. Most of the world doesn't have that luxury. It's a fabulous luxury. But today we have a multi-billion-dollar advertising campaign to convince us that bottled water is cleaner than tap water. And so we've developed these aversions. And the truth is, there have been studies done that show it's not cleaner than tap water. In many instances, it just is tap water.
Right.
So, we have a fabulous water system in the United States that is being eroded for these reasons, and we need to be sure to protect it.
Now, the book, The Price of Thirst, is certainly a wake-up call. To me, it's a little bit scary because, gosh, I had no idea it was this bad. But it's not all scary. I mean, you've got solutions. What should folks just generally, living life day to day, what should people be doing more of that they're not doing to help protect our water supply?
Well, I've already mentioned a couple of them, but drinking public water is one of them. Pushing Congress to protect and fund our public water system, really pushing the World Bank and the IMF, because the problem with the World Bank and the IMF is they're a non-transparent organization. So we don't really know what they're doing. We don't have a vote there. The votes are based on money rather than, democracy. So, and the poorer countries are excluded because of that in the sense of having power. And they're the ones that are getting hurt. And I don't think people realize the danger of that because it actually, this is one of the reasons Russia is in Ukraine right now, because they're saying the IMF is evil, and so we need to move in and help Ukraine before it goes over to the IMF. So it's not really helping their own case in a way. So we need to put a little pressure on them and people have been putting pressure on them for ages, but to stop forcing countries to develop in a certain way, in the way that they think is the right way. And for them, they work hand in hand with corporations oftentimes, and that means they force countries to privatize their water supplies. So, you can speak out about that to Congress. Just to your neighbor. If people become more aware, it's often through word of mouth. And then, another thing is that we really have to keep our minds open about the kind of world that we live in, like how it has developed in a certain way, the landscape itself, and be open to new forms of development within our own country, because there's so much that's unsustainable that ends up affecting our water supply here. So we need to reinvest in rural communities, for instance. We need to reinvest in agriculture, but small-scale agriculture, not large-scale agriculture. So we take the pressure off of cities, and then, those are the places that are running out of water.
Okay.
So those are just a few of the things I talk about.
Well, it is a great lesson for everybody. The book is The Price of Thirst: Global Water Inequality and the Coming Chaos. Encourage you all to check it out and start getting active. Call your congressman, call your senator, and we certainly need to address the issue before it becomes any more of a problem. University of Missouri professor Karen Piper joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Karen, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, and this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Elijah Cummings, the Maryland congressman and ranking Democrat on the House Oversight Committee.
One day after she appeared before the House Oversight Committee, Secret Service Director Julia Pearson offered her resignation. It was accepted by the Secretary of Homeland Security and by the President of the United States. And the President has asked Joe Clancy, a former head of the Protective Division of the Secret Service, to step in as interim director. We are so pleased to be able to speak this morning to one of my favorite members of Congress, the voice of reason on the House Oversight Committee, ranking Democrat Elijah Cummings. Congressman, always good to have you with us. Good morning.
It's good to be with you.
Thank you. So, Director Pearson offered her resignation. Did she do the right thing?
Absolutely. The problem is that, first of all, I appreciate her 30 years of dedicated service to our country, but a culture has developed, Mr. Press, where Secret Service agents feel more comfortable reporting to Congressman Chaffetz than they do in reporting to their higher-ups or to Ms. Pearson. And they are leaking almost on a daily basis information about botched operations, about personnel issues and things of that nature. And so when you have that kind of situation going on, it breeds mistrust within the organization itself. It also is a morale problem, and it becomes almost impossible for a leader to lead. And then when you've got a Congress that's finding out information not from the head of the Secret Service, but through agents who have turned to be whistleblowers. And don't get me wrong, I support whistleblowers, will protect them to the nth degree. But when you've got an agency like this, where they're trying to protect the lives of the president's family and vice president and all the other people and former presidents they have to protect, it's not the best situation. And that culture has been allowed to has come about probably for a lot of reasons. And she and I told her yesterday morning, I said, I've looked at this situation. I've tried to figure it out. How do you get past the culture problem? And I haven't even begun to talk about all of the missteps and problems that they've had over a series of events. And so it was time to go. And I think the president and the first lady had lost confidence. Right. I know I have. So that's it.
There are, as you mentioned, she had her responsibility. There were also officers, particularly when you go back to September 19 and the Omar Gonzalez incident, jumping the fence.
Right.
There were officers there who did not do their job. The ones out front who should have been watching that fence obviously were not. The people who should have trailed him, the people who should have released the dogs, the officer who should have been at the door to the north portico wasn't there. And so I guess what I'm getting to, aren't there some other people who should lose their jobs as well, Congressman?
Absolutely. I agree with you totally. And I'm glad you asked that question. And I've been trying when I spoke to Homeland Security Secretary Johnson, who, of course, is over all of this, I said to him, look, this culture of mediocrity that I see in these various incidents did not develop just because Ms. Pearson was in office for 18 months. There are some higher-ups that probably need to go. Mm-hmm. And he said to me that I'm going to be meeting with them this evening, and I'm going to be reading them the riot act. And I told him, I said, you need to let them know if they are not about the business of restoring honor to this very important organization, they need to go, period.
Yeah.
I mean, we just don't have time for error, and we don't have time for the Secret Service to be at war against itself.
Right.
That's a problem.
Yeah. Now, what do you know about Joe Clancy, and are you comfortable with his leadership, at least on an interim basis?
Yeah. I don't know him, but I've had an opportunity to talk to a number of people in the White House, those closest to the president, and they feel very good about him, Mr. Press. They say that the president has the utmost confidence in him of all the Secret Service agents he's worked with, and he's well respected by the other agents. But as one person very close to the president said to me yesterday, we all know, and the First Lady is comfortable, that this is a man that would take a bullet for the president, period.
Yeah. No.
And so, but I've said, people have asked me, well, Cummings, do you think that the person has to come from outside, the permanent person? I said, there are only three things I'm looking for. Number one, a person that the president has the confidence in will do the job. Number two, somebody who has an impeccable record and is highly skilled in this security area. And number three, someone who can come in, of course, gain the respect of the other agents, but at the same time, clean house if necessary, and always keep, and someone who will always keep his eye on the prize. That is protection of those people that the Secret Service has sworn to be responsible for.
And that's got to happen soon, doesn't it? Don't you think?
Yeah, you can't. You got to have. That's one agency you definitely have to have stability in. Let me tell you something, and one of the reasons why you want to have stability there is you can bet your bottom dollar that there are some folks that have been watching all of this and saying, well, maybe this is our chance to try something. Now, I would disagree with them because I think the Secret Service should be at super high alert right now. But anyway, so you don't want it to look unstable. As I told Director Pearson before she resigned yesterday, I said the mere problem and the mere fact that we are talking about this in the media, that we are talking about the Secret Service, is a problem. In other words, so these folks, they shouldn't be the subject of anything,
right?
But they are. So we need to address this as fast as we can. Reputation, Mr. President, is very important. A lot of people don't realize it. But not only must this organization perform in an excellent and effective manner, but they must have the reputation as doing so. And because that reputation in and of itself is a deterrent. But when you lose the reputation, there's a problem.
Indeed there is. So, Congressman, do you think it was a mistake to move a Secret Service from the Department of Treasury to the Department of Homeland Security? I'm really not.
A number of people have asked me that question. I'm not sure. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping that this panel of external experts will take a look at And that's one of the things I'm asking them to look at, because I think that's a good question. I just don't have enough information, Bill, to see exactly what would make the difference if it was somewhere else. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm not sure. But if that's something that we have to do to make it more effective, we need to do it. If we need to move it, we need to do that.
And there will be now this independent investigation, which you and others have called for, correct?
Definitely. As a matter of fact, when I spoke to Secretary Johnson yesterday, after he told me that she was resigning, the second thing he told me was that they were going to put this panel together very, very quickly.
Yeah. Congressman, I want to let you go, but I have to ask you one final question, which is...
Sure, no problem.
Which is, have we seen the end of the Benghazi beat-ups and the hearings, or are we in for more of that?
Oh, no, we are in for a lot more.
Oh, God.
I anticipate... that it's going to heat up right after the election, the way it looks. And again, as I've made it clear, I think a lot of this is aimed towards Hillary Clinton, and I think you're going to see, I'd say by probably around December, middle of December, stuff begin to heat up.
Yeah, I mean, how much more blood can they squeeze out of this turnip, right? I
really don't think there's any blood to be squeezed. We have a website now where we have now answered all the major questions that the Republicans claim that they want to have answers to, and we've actually taken them to documents that they, on their various committees, have agreed to the answers. So I don't know what they want, but we're trying to make sure that we are defenders of the truth.
Well, yeah. So there's nothing new that we can expect out of the Trey Gowdy hearings, right? That Darrell Issa didn't go over and over and over.
That's
and
exactly
over
right. I think they may have some things that they may want to rehash.
Yeah.
And we've spent millions upon millions, probably tens of millions of dollars already on these 9 investigations that have taken place. And so what I see is a rehashing of a few things that they feel that they want to look into. Again, keep in mind you have these contract security people who said that were over there in Benghazi and said that now they've written a book. I think they're going to try to pull them back in, and they're going to claim that there was a stand-down order when Republicans and Democrats have agreed that there was none, and that's actually in 2 or 3 reports.
Well,
and that is bipartisan reports.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff you're going to hear a lot of. I think you will also have at some point Hillary Clinton coming in to testify. I anticipate that. Probably Susan Rice coming in to testify.
Of course, we hear all that
kind of thing.
Oh, man. I'm so glad that you're there, again, as a voice of reason. So have you decided, if it comes down to the Nats versus the Orioles, have you decided who you're going to back in this contest here, Congressman?
Well, considering the fact that Orioles Stadium is 10 blocks from my house.
Not so tough, huh? Yeah.
It would be hard for me to root for the Nats, but certainly I'm a big fan of both teams.
Well, we know where your loyalties lie there.
Oh, yeah. And I was born here in Baltimore.
All right. Congressman, I'm going to be up there with my family actually on Sunday
wonderful.
at the Inner Harbor down at the aquarium. So
wonderful.
We'll look for you. Hey, thanks so much for your time this morning, Congressman. Great to talk to you.
Thank you.
Always.
Bye-bye now.
All right, thank you.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Gary Donaldson, Karen Piper, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the show and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.